The series begins with a former Marine whose name is Frank Castle. He had a peaceful life with his wife and kids until someone killed them. Since then, haunting memories of their murder won't let him be. He is now called the Punisher, and his main purpose is to kill everyone involved in the death of his family. Thinking he's accomplished his goal, he burns his Punisher armor and starts a new life. 6 months later, Frank has become a construction worker where he can unleash his anger. Frank lives in a small room where he constantly feels like his wife will be there for him. On the job, he is approached by a man who doesn't like the fact that Frank is breaking down walls too fast and they don't get paid for overtime, but Frank manages to keep his emotions in check. During a break, Donnie comes up to him. He doesn't like that the workers threw away Frank's food and offered him his sandwich. He thanks him for the treat. Donnie learns that Frank was a Marine and tells him that his father was also in the war. But when he was a kid, his family was killed. Frank realizes how much they are alike and asks Donnie not to look to him for a friend. After work, Frank comes to a circle of military men who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. He and Curtis are old friends. Curtis asks Frank to start his life over. He managed to avenge his family, but for Frank, the loss was too much to bear. While working tomorrow, he overhears a conversation about an upcoming robbery.
Guns at the table rule, except for one guard standing at the door.
Lance doesn't like that they have to rob the mob, but Paulie is sure they'll pull it off. They notice that their conversation has been overheard. Frank ignores them and tries to leave. Lance orders them to leave. Just as suddenly, there is a work injury at the construction site. Donnie asks Frank to help. He's a Marine and should know first aid, but Frank just walks away. Later, Lance and Paulie invite Donnie to join their gang. Although they don't tell him what they'll be doing, he agrees. A couple hours later, the trio storms a mob casino. Donnie has to collect the cash, but his ID falls out of his pocket, and now the mob knows exactly who robbed them. Lance offers to kill everyone, but Paulie orders them to run away.
No, come on, get out of here! Move!
Back at the construction site, they offer to roll Donnie in cement. What they don't know is that Frank is watching. Donnie is dumped in the cement pit. The trio begins to celebrate their victory, but Frank shows up. He asks them to turn off the cement mixer. Lance pulls a gun, forcing Frank to kill everyone and save Donnie. Meanwhile, the gangsters get all the information they know about Donnie from the cops. Suddenly, the lights go out. A gunfight ensues, and Frank emerges victorious. But what Frank didn't realize was that he could be caught on a security camera. On the other hand, there's Special Agent Dina Madani. She's back in New York City after a stint in Afghanistan. Her primary focus is the murder of her partner, Zuber, an Afghan national police officer. Dina suspects that U.S. soldiers were involved in heroin trafficking.
Discovered United States soldiers are trafficking heroin.
And when Zuber uncovered it, they silenced him. She tries convincing Special Agent in charge, Carson Wolf, but he dismisses the case as off-limits. Undeterred, Dinah turns to her new partner, Sam Stein, for assistance. She urges him to dig into files about Colonel Schoonover
And a Marine Force recon colonel called Schoonover.
the explosion and drug bust at the docks last year, and everything related to one of Schoonover's men, Frank Castle. Although Sam believes the Punisher is dead, Dina finds it hard to believe that Frank and Schoonover died within New York City limits.
Everything available on one of his men, Lieutenant Frank Castle.
Just meter from each other. During breakfast, the phone rings and asks to put Frank on the phone. The man introduces himself as Microchip. He calls Frank's name and says he knows about his double life. Microchip assures Frank that they are not enemies.
This town, Frank. Hey, did you ever get that disc?
He's the one who gave Frank the disc with the video of the man's murder on it, killed by an American Army soldier. As he leaves the cafe, he notices a glare of light from a neighboring building. Frank quickly goes up to the roof but finds no one. The Microchip has left a cell phone for Frank. Looking around the area, he notices a man waving at him. Frank goes to the only person he trusts. Curtis swears he never gave Frank up. He questions why his family died. Maybe his past is to blame.
What happened to Maria and the kids? It was because of something that I did.
To learn something new, he seeks out his friend Karen. Frank tells her about the microchip. The man says that Frank is not the only one who faked his death. Karen agrees to help.
How do I contact you?
A couple days later, Karen learns from the editor-in-chief that an article about the hacker microchip was brought to them, but the government has asked that the article not be printed in the paper. Before giving Frank the information, Karen wants to understand what he will do with the microchip. Frank promises that if he's not a villain, he's in no danger. A couple hours later, he jumps on Microchip's wife's car on purpose to make it look plausible. He scratches his head with a razor blade.
Oh my God. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
This feeds into a security camera, which a microchip watches from his secret base. He fears that Frank has decided to take his family hostage, causing him to grab a gun and drive home. Sarah suggests that Frank go inside the house. She tells him that her husband worked for the government but died a year ago.
He actually passed away.
The girl tells him Microchip's real name, David, who has already arrived at the house as soon as his wife came outside. Observing a broken headlight on Sarah's car, Frank helps fix it instead of harming Micro's family. Frank provides assistance, allowing Micro to retreat to his hideout without exposing himself. David realizes that Frank didn't intend to hurt her and goes back to the base. That night, Frank shaves off his hair and changes his gait so the human recognition software can't detect him. Then he breaks into Carson's house. After a brief fight, the man wakes up tied to a chair. Frank wants to know who David is. Carson starts laughing, and then Frank insinuates that he'd better answer.
In torture, it doesn't work.
Carson calls David a traitor who was killed in custody. Frank knows he is lying and what he shoots the man for. However, Frank didn't know that he managed to get free because of what he did when he took the gun away and removed his mask. Frank Carson says that he and his men are the ones who killed his family. Carson wants to personally kill the Punisher, but the gun was unloaded.
The third time's a charm. The freaking Punisher.
Frank attacks the man and breaks his neck. Tomorrow, David calls Frank and says he killed Carson. The next day, Frank sits in a diner and receives a call from David. David's first question revolves around why Frank visited his house. Frank responds that David chose to put his family in jeopardy by crossing paths with the wrong person. With a stern warning, Frank directs David to meet him at a cemetery. Upon David's arrival at the designated location, he encounters Curtis instead of Frank.
Whoa. Who are you?
Curtis relays the message that Frank has canceled the meeting and issues a stern warning that if David continues pursuing Frank, Curtis will retaliate by going after Sarah. Disheartened, returns to his hideout, only to be surprised by Frank, who had hidden himself in David's car trunk. The Punisher knocks the man out.
No.
David swears he means him no harm, but he's interrupted by an alarm. He explains that there is a defense in his base, and if he doesn't enter the code in 3 minutes, everything will explode. Frank doesn't believe it, but seeing David's consternation, he pulls him over to the computer and allows him to enter the code. David then tells him that he worked in intelligence in Afghanistan one day and that he found important information. It's what's on the disk. Frank got Carson, and his men wanted to kill David to keep his family safe. He had to run out of the car, but Carson caught up with him near the river. In a desperate attempt to clear his name, David shouted that the authorities had the wrong information.
Your orders? I'm not a criminal, I'm an NSA analyst.
David's wife, Sarah, arrived at the scene only to witness a gun pointed at her husband as David refused to surrender. Carson cornered him and shot him, but a cell phone saved his life. Frank can't believe David survived without help. David says he's just like Frank, and they should be friends. During the next password entry, Frank says that in Afghanistan he was on a mission called Cerberus. They managed to capture Zuber, and a CIA agent tortured him. The interrogation was in Persian, so the squad couldn't understand what they were saying.
What's he saying?
Zuber turned out to be innocent, and it was the CIA agent who was dealing drugs when the interrogation was over. He ordered Frank to kill Zuber. Another military man thought it was odd that they were ordered to remove the bullet. It looked like they were hiding evidence when Frank wakes up. David offers to untie him after entering the password. David uses a hidden syringe and knocks Frank out when he wakes up. David is calmly drinking coffee. He explains to Frank that if he wanted him dead, the Punisher would already be dead. They need to team up and defeat the villains. Back in the past, the soldiers were given a new assignment. However, Frank suspects it's an ambush.
My wife. I love my wife.
But Agent William won't listen to him. They have reliable intelligence, and Frank doesn't need to, so panic already has it. At night, their squad is ambushed. The enemy proves to be too many, and Captain Anderson loses an arm to survive. Frank ran to the attack and single-handedly destroyed the enemy squad using not only firearms but also his own hands. When the squad returned to base, William asked what happened to the main goal.
Did you kill the target?
This drives Frank mad, and he ripped William's eye out. But they had no idea that William had purposely sent them into a trap to kill witnesses to Zuber's murder. David says that if Frank had killed William, then his family would still be alive for the last few months. David has been hacking into the CIA's security system.
Hacking into every agency and their server.
And phone numbers. If they work together, Franks will be able to avenge his family. The operation Frank was involved in is not in the congressional database, which means it's completely illegal. Frank agrees to team up, but on one condition: everyone has to die. That's fine with David.
Yeah, blow me off. Yeah, do it.
But to do that, they need guns. Frank catches a black market dealer. He says his weapons have been stolen, leaving one sniper rifle. David hacks into the police database and learns an illegal shipment of guns is coming into town tomorrow. The Greeks think they have a meeting with the gangsters, but it's a trap by national security agents. There will be snipers and an extraction team everywhere to steal the weapons. The Punisher needs a car. He infiltrates. The Hanger kills the local gang and takes their car late at night. The agents begin their mission. It's led by Dina Madani. The weapons van is on its way. The expected time of arrival is minutes. Their negotiations are monitored by David at the right moment. He turns on loud music and jams the agent's communications.
Solo 1, can you read me?
Frank immediately jumps onto the roof of the truck and takes the driver's seat. The car was followed by two agents. They get trapped by Frank, who hints that they better jump into the water. Dina notices that the camera video is looped, so she drives to the rendezvous point. She quickly finds the missing truck. Frank blocks the way, and a chase ensues between them. Dina manages to pull into the rendezvous, and the duo decide to crash into each other. But David comes to the rescue, ramming Dina's car. Frank doesn't want the agent to die and pulls the girl away from the car. Dina recognizes Frank and asks, "Did he kill Carson?" Frank says, "Yeah. Carson was a bad man. When Frank left, the car exploded, and Dina realized he saved her life." David didn't like that his partner saved the agent. Now their entire mission is in question in between murders. Frank helps David's family, and the girl persuades Sarah to invite Frank to the evening dinner.
My mom was thinking she'd like to have you over.
He gladly agrees, but it does not please David back at the base. David suggests finding the man who shot the video. His name is Gaynor, and he may know where William is. After a while, David manages to find Gaynor. He lives far away from the big cities. It's obvious he's hiding out. Frank doesn't like that. David wants to go to Garner. If something goes wrong, he won't be able to save him. That's why Frank will have to go with him the next day. They arrive at the right place. David will keep an eye on the car while Frank searches for Gaynor. There are traps set throughout the woods protecting the little house. David yells Gaynor's name and tells him not to be afraid. As he gets closer to the house, a metal arrow stabs him in the shoulder. David once again yells that they are not the enemy. There was an agent in their squad who betrayed everyone.
I didn't know who was on it. I didn't know who I could trust.
Gaynor apologizes for the shoulder wound and says he doesn't know the agent's real name. Their conversation is interrupted by the sound of a helicopter approaching the military races to find Garner. Their operation is being watched by William Gaynor, skillfully wounds the pursuers, and some fall into preset traps. William now knows that Frank is alive. There were too many military men, and they wound Gaynor and William. When the Punisher runs out of bullets, the military comes out of hiding. David raises a drone into the sky and tells them where the military is now. The enemy numbers are quickly dwindling. There are only 2 enemies left. Frank climbs out from under the grass and kills the last soldier. Because of this battle, he is unable to attend a family dinner. The wounded friends fall to the ground after a while. David finds Frank and hooks him up to an IV as Frank lies unconscious. He dreams about the family dinner. His daughter has prepared a special gift. Everyone starts to have fun, but Frank realizes it's not real. His hands and feet are tied, and an armed Posey enters the room. He tries to save the family.
Wait!
But there is nothing he can do at this time. Devin comes to Curtis and asks for his help. Being an elite military man, he has had medical training. Curtis quickly realizes that Frank has sepsis. A foreign object needs to be removed after the surgery. Frank regains consciousness and asks for Gaynor's help. David says he didn't make it. The radio has been playing the same tape all day in it. Billy calls Frank by his army call sign. David begins to suspect that Billy has somehow found out that Frank is still alive. Frank is convinced that Billy is his friend. Meanwhile, Dina investigates the site of Ghana's death, and though all the military bodies were taken away much earlier, she realizes that one man couldn't have left such shell casings in the revenge with Garner. There was another man who called the police and told them where Gaynor's body was.
Anyone turning up at local hospitals with gunshot wounds.
Dina suspects Frank to confirm her theory. Sam has to do a DNA test a couple hours later. Sam confirms that the blood belongs to Frank. She quickly realizes that he's being hunted by a man who's trying to hide Project Cirrus, and that person must be very powerful to find out more. She meets Billy, with whom they had a romantic relationship. He now owns a private military company. She tells him that Frank is alive. Billy swears he didn't know that Dina asks for help finding Frank. She's investigating Project Cirrus, and Frank can help her with that. Billy agrees to help Billy, then comes to Curtis and immediately asks, when was the last time Curtis met with Frank? He pretends not to know what Billy is talking about.
Am I seeing ghosts or having flashbacks?
Billy tells him that he started calling Frank on the radio, but he doesn't get an answer. That same afternoon, Curtis comes to Frank and offers to accept Billy's help. Frank is reluctant to involve new people in his mission. Still, he answers the radio and sets up a meeting. Billy tells him that his private company has been training CIA agents. Dina was among them, and she wants to find Frank.
Question me about you because of our service together.
He tells him that Agent William and Colonel Bat were using the bodies of soldiers to transport drugs. Gaynor found out first and tried to expose the truth, but he was killed. Billy suggests that Frank give up the case and start a new life. He will get him a new passport and give him a position in his company. After the meeting, Frank shows up at Sarah's house. He apologizes for not being able to make it to dinner. Sarah tells him how difficult it is for her to live and raise her children alone. Their conversation is watched by David, and he is sorry that he had to leave his family behind.
And she beats herself up if she gets anything less than an A.
Meanwhile, at the harbor, Billy is waiting for Frank, but he doesn't show up. Billy gets into the car and tells William that his plan has failed. The duo wants to break into Bennett's house and find out where Agent William is now. Billy assures William that Dina won't be able to find Frank before they do. William doesn't understand why Billy didn't kill Frank when he had the chance. They realize that Frank will want to catch Bat, causing them to ambush him that evening.
Please don't kill me! They made me do those things!
Frank breaks into Bat's house. The girl starts screaming, and that's the signal for Billy's squad. David takes 3 minutes to copy Bat's cell phone and notices an armed squad. Approaching the house, Frank orders Bat to sit tight and then throws smoke grenades. The squad enters the room. Frank starts killing them one by one using the laser sight. He distracts Billy and shoots him several times after waiting for a full load. Frank escapes and Billy miraculously survives. Frank runs into a tunnel where a soldier catches him. He tries to explain that they are not each other's enemies, but the soldier won't back down, and Frank wounds him in the shoulder a little later. Frank blames himself for not killing Bat, but David says they did the right thing. They now have access to his phone tomorrow. Banat blames the duo for using him as bait and says he didn't tell Frank anything. But if William thought Frank was dead,
I thought Castle was dead. As did we all.
then why was Billy's Posey outside his house and the girl was yelling? He was here for some reason. Obviously, they're lying to him. William is ready to help Banat get a new passport and move to another country.
Will get you safely out of the country. Until then,
But before he does, he needs to leave all of his personal belongings behind, including his cell phone. Billy doesn't want any witnesses, so he kills Bat. Meanwhile, Dina and Sam search the office for a wire trap. She manages to find a small device, but she doesn't break it. The duo arrives at the secret CIA house where Bat left his phone. Frank arms himself with a sniper rifle and finds Agent William. He stands in front of the window, and Frank pulls the trigger. But the glass proves to be bulletproof. The alarm goes off instantly, but they manage to escape back at the base. David compares the photo from the scope with the photo of the CIA Director of Covert Operations. It is quite possible that when David opened file, he gave away his secret base. He also managed to find out that Bennett had been murdered. Suddenly, David notices that the cameras from his house have stopped working.
You need to get over there now and check on my family.
Frank immediately goes to check them out. Frank didn't want to seem strange and brought flowers as an apology. It turns out Sarah turned off the internet on purpose to punish her son. Sarah suggests a drink. He agrees, realizing that Sarah is fine. He fixes the internet and is about to leave, but Sarah stops him and kisses him. Frank asks to stop, and Sarah offers to forget it. When Frank returns to the base, David was already pretty drunk. Frank doesn't know how to explain the kiss, but David doesn't blame them. Dina and Sam come up with a plan to frame the people who are eavesdropping on them. William and Billy fall for it. They meet to discuss a plan of action. Billy's not about to put his men at risk. He has already lost 9 soldiers.
We go after him again, I can't use anybody on my payroll.
Billy offers jobs to his former mercenaries. Their reputations have long been ruined, causing them to accept tomorrow.
Somebody must really need someone dead. Somebody always does.
Sarah leaves a voicemail.
Anyway, if you could call me back, I would really appreciate it.
Her son wants to hurt someone, and she would love the help David authorizes, Sarah's help. She found a large knife in her son's backpack.
I found this in Zach's backpack.
And the other day, he snuck his sister away. Frank quickly finds common ground with the boy. Meanwhile, Billy's Posey arrive at the designated address and fall into a trap set by Dima. The mercenaries are cornered and try to escape to prevent the mercenaries from betraying Billy. He kills them outside. Sam catches Billy. He orders him to sit on his knees, after which he removes the mask. Billy immediately pulls out a concealed knife and kills. Sam David is sure that Dina had nothing to do with his partner's death and offers to send an encrypted letter. On the other hand, we are shown the story of Lewis Wilson, a United States Army veteran grappling with the challenges of reintegrating into civilian life upon his return to the United States. He confronted the devastating effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, struggling with his unstable mental state. He even attempted to harm his own father. In a desperate moment, he tried to take his own life but was unsuccessful, coping with his trauma. He chose to sleep in a foxhole. He dug in his yard rather than his bed. Seeking a way to channel his military home skills, he enlisted with Billy's private military group Anvil. However, his expectation of securing a position with Anvil were dashed when Billy, aware of his mental struggles,
One of the best men I ever had the good fortune of serving with, Lewis,
opted not to recruit him. Responding to his father's request, Lewis reluctantly started attending group therapy sessions for military veterans organized by Curtis.
Signed up till 77 and never saw combat. He's a fraud.
During these sessions, he encountered O.K. Connor, who presented himself as a Vietnam War veteran. However, O.K. Connor's true agenda was to promote extremist rhetoric. Intrigued by O.K. Connor's views, Lewis, who already felt rejected by his country, found resonance in the belief that the rules no longer applied and the nation had forsaken the army. It had trained, inspired to make a stand. Lewis joined Connor in a protest outside the Bronx County Courthouse. The protest centered around a teacher facing charges for entering his classroom with a revolver. Lewis delved into O.K. Connor's military records, discovering that O.K. Connor never served in the Vietnam War.
Got one job. Kill the other guy.
He confronted O.K. Connor with the evidence, but the liar denied the accusations, suggesting someone might have tampered with the information. He went to a hardware store and purchased materials to craft homemade bombs with all preparations in place. He sends a letter to Frank's lawyer, Karen. He seeks Karen's help in the letter, believing she can understand his perspective. According to his manifesto, he's defending the liberties of the American people against a government he sees as trying to strip away those rights. As a call to arms,
This country we love, to print my words as a call to arms.
he insists that Karen publish his remarks. Otherwise, he will target the New York Bulletin building next time disagreeing. Meanwhile, Frank watches the news and despises the man who did it tomorrow. The papers print Karen's response. Frank fears that her life is now in jeopardy. She also decides to come on the radio. They get a call from Lewis, asking why Karen is calling him a bad man.
Why did you say those things about me, Karen?
He calls her a pawn in the hands of the senator. Frank notices a familiar phrase and remembers Lewis. David must find him before it is too late. Curtis overhears Lewis and asks to talk to him, but before he does, Curtis arrives at Connor's house. He hasn't been to a meeting in a while and is afraid something has happened to him. The door smells awful, and he has to break it down behind, which lies Connor's body, and on the table is a homemade explosive. Then Lewis shows up behind him. He asks the guy to come to his senses, but Lewis is convinced he's making the right choice.
None of that matters. Now.
A fight breaks out. Lewis takes the prosthetic leg and beats up Curtis a little later. David spots Lewis and Curtis's cell phone. Frank arrives at the right address and finds Curtis tied to a chair. He's still alive, and explains what happened to him.
Where you going? I'm gonna clean you up a bit.
Just as suddenly, Lewis calls on the phone. He is surprised that Frank is still alive. Frank asks Lewis to let Curtis go, as he is on their side.
It will not end well. They will find you and they will kill you before you ever make a dent.
Frank then tries to figure out how he can defuse the bomb. They get another call from Lewis. He doesn't wish Frank any harm. He says he'll help Lewis on one condition. He has to tell him which wire to cut. Then he tells him a story from his time in the army. Lewis thinks it over and names the white wire.
Try the white wire.
Frank tells his friend not to worry and to cut the wire. Lewis tells the truth. The only thing left to do is to escape from the police. He disarms 2 officers and steals their car. At this time, David meets with Dina to relay the names of the people involved in Operation Cirrus. Upon hearing the name, Dina's eyes change.
Have you got a name?
William Rollins.
The TV starts showing footage of Frank. He's been accused of setting off the bombs. Frank calls Bill, who once again offers to take him to another country. Frank warns that Lewis wants to kill the senator. Bill has to keep up the appearance that the senator is still in the room.
I'm here to protect your image. I'm here to keep you from getting your ass shot off.
And Frank will handle the problem a little later. Karen starts interviewing the senator, but the door explodes. And Lewis walks into the room with Frank to kill the senator. But that's not what really happened. Karen is convinced that Frank is not a terrorist. He wants to save her. And if it weren't for Frank, the senator would be dead. At 9:54, Lewis infiltrated the building under the guise of security and single-handedly kills all the guards on the floor. Frank runs into the room and saves Karen. The senator was so scared that he pushed the girl into Lewis and he took her hostage. He ordered her to drop the gun or he would detonate the bomb as soon as they got into the elevator. Billy's mercenaries tried to kill Frank, but he used the guard's body as a human shield. Early in the morning, Dina told her boss that she had learned that Frank was alive.
Castle being alive vindicates everything going on here.
And had found a hidden bug she and Sam wanted to ambush whoever bugged them. The warden's handing over files on every dead mercenary they all worked for. Bill Dina sets up a meeting with Billy, but he pretends he hasn't seen them in a while. Their conversation is interrupted by an alarm. Dina catches Frank and asks him to throw away his gun. He realizes that Dina won't shoot him just as suddenly. Billy hits. Frank realizes that Billy is a traitor during their argument. The police arrive and detain the trio, but Frank grabs a fire hose and jumps down. Dina is spotted by Karen. She explains that there are very powerful people.
There are a lot of people that want Frank dead.
Who want Frank dead and asks her to tell her what Lewis did to her and how she can find Frank, turns out, during the escape. Frank managed to find them. Frank specifically thanks Lewis for calling the white wire to save. Karen realizes the clue and rips out the right wire, then uses the gun hidden in the bag. Lewis locks himself in the freezer, fixes the bomb, and presses the button. He then takes Karen hostage and escapes using a prearranged wrench. Frank sits on the riverbank and doesn't understand how a man he has trusted his whole life can turn out to be a traitor. Sarah's family is stunned that Frank turned out to be a bandit. Dina realizes that Billy was the fifth mercenary to escape. She calls him in for questioning and tries to get his confession, but he won't say anything.
I'm going to share several crime scene photos with you. Look at them carefully.
A policeman comes to Sarah's house. He says that the police were called from this house to give a statement on Frank. Sarah says she didn't call anyone. The policeman asks where is her daughter. This seems very strange to Sarah, and she replies that she is not home and asks her son to run.
Zach, run!
The man starts a chase, and Sarah tries to protect her family, but another officer approaches from the back. Frank and David notice drops of blood on the floor of the house.
Right there.
Frank realized that Sarah has his phone number, which means they'll be arriving at their secret base soon. Frank asks David to go to his daughter. He stays here and sets a trap for Billy's men. He loads all his weapons and hides them in different places. He puts gunpowder in every lamp and puts on his Punisher armor an hour later. The mercenaries infiltrate the base, but what they didn't realize is that it's not Frank they're up against. Now it's a Punisher who uses a lot of traps. He uses the mercenary's head as a homemade bomb. Panic ensues, but that only helps the Punisher deal with the mercenaries. After waiting for the mercenaries to stand next to the lamps, he presses a button, then he pulls out a large caliber machine gun and goes on the attack. He takes the mercenary's cell phone and calls Billy Frank. Promises that it won't be long before they go head-to-head now. If he lays a finger on David's family, all the dirt will be uploaded to the internet.
I'm gonna tell you right now, anything happens to that family, whole world.
He's offering a trade, David's family, in exchange for information. Later, the duo arrives at the exchange site. Sarah has a can of gasoline strapped to her. Frank is sure it's a show-off. They won't do anything about it. Billy calls Frank and asks them to get in the car.
If you do anything else, the happy family turns into a bonfire.
Just as Dina and his men show up, the mercenary sets the gasoline on fire. David takes off his jacket and puts out the flames, but he is accidentally hit by several bullets, and Sarah sees her husband die. Billy could kill his enemies, but decides to shoot the tires. Comes to his senses tied to a chair. Frank swears he's going to kill him.
I'm gonna kill you, Bill.
This makes Bill laugh. He can't be defeated. He needs the access code to the computer. Frank says that only David knew the access code, but now he's gone. Homeland Security agents hit him 3 times, but he's actually alive. It was Dina's master plan, and finally, David can be reunited with his family. William comes to Frank to avenge his lost eye, but even after many blows, Frank just laughs at them. He asks for his hand to be untied so he can enter the password and injure William. Turns out that was David's plan. Now he can tap into his base and show the surveillance cameras. Frank decides that if he fails to kill them, Dina will have evidence on Billy, and William Frank manages to break free and is ready to show William what real anger is all about. Billy watches, but does nothing. Before he can pull the trigger, Dina comes to the rescue. Billy manages to escape. He takes his new passport and a lot of money. National security agents break into his house, but they fall into a trap to make all the Ulix disappear. He blows up his office. David gives Frank the money he managed to get out of Billy's account. Dina asks Frank to leave town and start a new life, but he has to realize he and Dina aren't friends, and if she sees him again, she'll have to arrest him. Curtis wakes up and notices his gun is missing from under his pillow. Billy's not going to kill him. He asks if Curtis knew that Frank was alive all along.
How long do you know Frank was alive?
He says yes. This upsets Billy. The duo goes into the kitchen, and Curtis pulls the curtains open as they are talking. A bullet pierces the building, narrowly missing Billy in retaliation for the betrayal. Billy shoots at Curtis, injuring his shoulder as it unfolds. Frank is positioned on the adjacent building, patiently awaiting Billy to appear in the window so he can exact his revenge. Billy attempts to rise, but the moment his knife becomes visible to Frank, a shot is fired, forcing him to remain where he is. Frank contacts Curtis and instructs him to put Billy on the phone when Billy takes the phone. Frank warns him not to harm Curtis. A decision is made to meet at their usual gathering place, the park, where they used to spend time together as a family. Frank looks around the park and sees two hostages. Frank fires a 6-shot grenade launcher, distracting Billy, and runs into the park from the opposite side. Frank is immediately wounded but still tries to kill Billy, limping on one leg. Frank jumps onto the carousel, where Billy is now hiding. They get into each other again. But Billy's lucky. His cheeks stop the bullet to keep the hostages safe. Frank comes out of hiding. That's when Dina comes into the park and orders Bill to drop his gun. This causes her to catch a bullet. Frank rushes into attack. They inflict serious wounds on each other. But Frank is much stronger, and he drags Bill through broken glass. Afterwards, he frees the hostages and stays to hold Dina's wound until the police arrive, in gratitude for saving his daughter. Frank is released, and his reputation is cleared.
As a free man.
Billy is also alive, but the doctors don't know how long before he wakes up, or if his memory will survive. That's the end of the first season of The Punisher. If you enjoy the video, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments section the next movie I will recap for you.